because we're going to record today's program and share it on the PNRA YouTube channel. And Dr. Leachman is, of course, being the presenter, can share it on the UPHS YouTube channel as well. So welcome everybody to the December 20th installment of the PNRA Volunteers Meeting. Jonathan Fisher here, your erstwhile host, and we've got a special guest today, Dr. Rob Leachman. We'll get to in a minute. First, I'd like to turn it over to Steve Howes of the Sumter Valley. I saw in my NRHS newsletter yesterday, Steve, that Sumter Valley got a grant to work on its archive. And I understand that this is one of several grants, generous grants that you folks have received. And why don't you tell us a little bit about the support you guys are receiving?
Sure. The archives effort of Sumter Valley Railroad has been around since its inception back in 1971. And the majority of it sort of took the background for a while, but we got a big infusion of cash when our unofficial historian, a fellow by the name of Ron Haar, who used to work for the SP, lived in Eugene. He had a very large interest in the Sumter Valley, did a lot of research, watching grades and everything. And when he retired, he bought a home in the town of Sumter. And when he passed away, he donated the proceeds from the sale of his property to the railroad. And that gave us about $150,000 to start with. And we finally got around to several years ago, we actually started the construction of our archives building at our yard facility in McEwen. The $150,000, of course, wasn't enough to cover the entire cost of construction. And of course, it's changed as we went along. So we did some applications for grants, and we were successful. The first one that came in was one from the NRHS, and it was in the amount of $4,600. It was a matching grant, so we took some of the money we had and put with it. And most of the money initially just went for the floor and the framing of the building. And subsequently, the NRHS grant, I believe, came in several months ago. Since then, we've gotten a $7,000 grant from the state of Oregon. I'm not sure exactly what agency it came from, but I looked at our last financial report and it said Parks and Recreation on it. But regardless, it was a $7,000 infusion that was very helpful. We also got $10,000 from Union Pacific Foundation. And then just recently, we got a $5,200 grant from the Leo Adler Foundation, which is a charitable foundation that was founded by a older gentleman who has since passed away, but he made his fortune, lived in Baker City, selling magazines, and he's become known as Uncle Leo around the city of Baker City because his foundation has supported many projects around varied projects around the Baker County area and elsewhere. And then also since then, we've gotten a couple of $5,000 donations, other smaller ones. And as a result, it looks like we're going to have the funds in place to go ahead and have the building completed sometime this spring or summer. The grant from the Leo Adler Foundation is going to go towards purchasing shelving, furniture, and that sort of thing, file cabinets, making sure we have everything we need to keep all of our artifacts and documents, photographs, maps, and in safe storage. And right now they've just finished up. They still have a little bit left to do on the interior, but we've got the HVAC and heat, windows, security features all in place. And I think this spring and summer, those of us that work on the archives committee will have quite a workload in moving all of our materials from Enterprise, where they are now, down to McEwen, and hopefully some of you folks will have the opportunity to come over, see our archives project, and maybe ride the train while you're there.
Fantastic. Thanks for the update, Steve. And it's good to hear that you guys have got enough funding to be able to complete, this initial level of creating a physical archive for all the cool stuff that you guys have got over there at Sumter Valley.
We're looking forward to getting it all in place and having it where we can show the public and possibly get more support for our organization and get material out there that a lot of people haven't seen before.
Great. Well, Steve, this is actually a really great segue because, we are reaching the end of the year. And those of you that have been out there that have had a good year and life has been good, why not take a minute and support a heritage organization of your interest and your support and help those organizations like here at the Sumter Valley and some of the other institutions that we help support. Cascade Rail Foundation, of course, is mine, but support a local history organization with a little bit of your, kind of that couch change kind of stuff, So just a plug for a little charitable giving at your end. We're going to get started in a second. I just want to just quickly go over our coming events for the next, roughly month and a half or so. Our next program, January 3rd, 2024, as I'm getting ready to start saying that, will be Chuck Soul, and Chuck Soul will be presenting Northern Pacific Thurston County history. On January 13th at 11 a.m. Pacific time, we've got a live event that will be streamed with famed Northern Pacific retired engineer Jack Christensen. Jack Christensen will be talking about driving passenger trains out to Grays Harbor. So that's going to be a fun one. We'll be doing that in conjunction with the NPRHA and the Highline Heritage Museum. January 17th, Mark Borleski, Cascade Rail Foundation board member, will be presenting on the efforts that CRF has gone through with Washington State Parks to rehabilitate some of these bridges in Eastern Washington. Dr. Leachman's very familiar with some of these bridges, and they're now open, and George, of course, are now open for the public. Trent says, renew those annual memberships in your favorite organization. That's absolutely right. January 31st, we have Professor Doug Oakman, emeritus from Pacific Lutheran University, and he will be presenting on Morse Code and the Morris Telegraph Club in the Puget Sound area. And then February 14th, a favorite of our programming for sure, Mike Bergman will be back, and Mike will be talking about streetcars somewhere. Mike's passion is transit, and he's very good at teasing this stuff out. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Professor Leachman, Dr. Rob Leachman, University of California at Berkeley. Dr. Leachman, tell us a little bit about yourself, about the UPHS, and sir, the program is all yours. We're honored to have you here today, sir.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me share my screen because the things you requested will be in there. Okay, can we all see that?
Yeah, I know where you're at here.
Yeah, looks good. Yeah, George is probably driving some of these trains, aren't you, George?
Oh, would I do that?
These are old stuff. They're before he got there, but I'm sure he's been over every inch of the track.
All right, sir, it's all yours.
Okay, so some of you I know, nice to see you again. Some of you I probably am a new face to, so I'll give you a quick introduction. My dad was a Portland-based plywood and lumber broker. He was responsible for many of the roller lumber loads on the railroads. So he was a very big customer of all three of the railroads in the Pacific Northwest. And among his friends was the general manager of UP's Northwestern District, George Baker. And my dad said, I have a son going to college who's really interested in the railroads. Can he get a summer job? And so I remember when I came to the superintendent's office in Albina Yard in Portland, and I noticed written on the top of my application was a handwritten note that said, this man is a personal friend of the general manager. He should be hired immediately. So it wasn't what I know, it was who I knew that got me started in the UP. But I got summer jobs working as a telegrapher, operator, and agent during the summers in college, 70 through 73, and ran all around the Oregon division in Oregon, Washington, Idaho. In particular, one of my first jobs in the summer of 70 was the night ticket clerk operator at Baker, Oregon. And I can still remember in the weeds and under the bushes, there was 3-rail track from when traffic was transloaded from the Sumter Valley to the UP. At any rate, after college, I took a job in the headquarters in Omaha in the newly formed service planning group. We were a new group, kind of the interface between traffic and operations, and the railroad didn't know what to do with us, so we made up our own projects, so it was a lot of fun. I did that for a couple of years, then went to grad school, and the railroad begged me to come back during the summer break of my first year of grad school, so I went back up to Hinkle as car distributor to help them implement some of the stuff I designed when I was in Omaha. And then I came back to grad school, finished a PhD, and became a professor at Berkeley. So on the side of being a professor, I also have a consulting firm, Leachman and Associates, and we provide consulting and software for manufacturing, supply chain, and rail operations analysis. And our clients have been corporations and government agencies worldwide. This year, I retired from UC Berkeley, but I continue to teach one class voluntarily per year in retirement, and I still have grad student and research grants, so I still have research projects and still running the consulting business. I joined the board of the UP Historical Society in 2012, and in 2022, I became president. Just a little blurb on the UPHS. Founded in 1984, it's independent of the railroad, nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and sharing the history of the Union Pacific Railroad. If you sign up to be a member, you receive our quarterly magazine, The Streamliner. If you sign up at the sustaining or preservation level, you also get our calendar, and you can go to uphs.org to read all about it. We hold an annual convention, including field trips and presentations related to UP history. Our 2024 convention will be May 11 down at the Southern California Railway Museum. We'll focus on the UP in Southern California. And we also are growing an archive of historic UP photos and paperwork, which we maintain at the American Heritage Center at the University of Wyoming. From time to time, we publish books on UP history, and you can see what we have available at our online company store at the uphs.org site. So what you're about to watch is a presentation I gave at our 2023 convention, which was in Pasco, Washington. So it was focused on UP in the Northwest. And the contents of this presentation will appear as an article in a future issue of the Streamliner. Okay, so here we go. Many of you know the UP Oregon Division, but as a quick primer for those maybe who haven't followed it, I have a little map there with the main lines a little heavier than the branch lines. Coming from the Idaho border, going west from Huntington, Oregon, the first subdivision extends to LeGrand, and there are grades both directions, and then the second sub from LeGrand to Hinkle. And those two subdivisions were affectionately referred to as the Mountain. Then going down the gorge, you have the third sub to the Dalles and the fourth sub continuing from the Dalles to Albina Yard in Portland. And they were collectively known as the Sandy. Then going north on BN and Milwaukee trackage rights to Seattle was the north end. And then from Hinkle over to Spokane was the sixth sub or the Washi. And then north of Spokane was The Spokane International subsidiary railroad UP bought in 1958 was pretty much a branch line in the 1970s. It's become much more of a main line in recent years. And then jointly owned with BN was the Camas Prairie from Riparia over to Lewiston and beyond. Okay, we're going to focus on the Blue Mountains section, and I'm going to cover a little bit of the history of how the railroad ended up there. And you can kind of see Umatilla on the Columbia at the upper left and Huntington at the lower right. And we're going to be talking about that piece of railroad. This is a map from the 1920s of the Oregon-Washington Railroad and Navigation. Okay, so our history starts with this fellow who was born Ferdinand Heinrich Gustav Hilgard. And when he clandestinely emigrated to the U.S. without his parents' knowledge, he changed his name to Henry Villard, one of his classmates at boarding school in France. And he got into finance and Wall Street, and with his connections back to Germany, he represented a lot of German bondholders. There have been a lot of German investors in companies in the Pacific Northwest. In particular, they had the majority of the bonds in the Oregon Steamship Company and the Oregon and California Railroad. Both went under. And so in 1875, he took control of those companies on behalf of the bondholders. A few years later, he acquired the Oregon Steam Navigation Company, which was operating a fleet of steamers and a couple of portage railroads along the Columbia River. And he renamed the company as the Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company, ORNN. And he saw that railroads were the wave of the future and would make steamboats obsolete. So he directed the ORNN to build a rail line along the south bank of the Columbia from Portland to Wallula, where the Northern Pacific was building eastward their Transcon charter. They had a charter to build from the Great Lakes to Puget Sound, but they'd struggled financially, and they'd only built west from Carlton, Minnesota, near Duluth, to the Missouri River, and only a little ways east from Wallula. And Villard hoped to convince them that you should use my ORNN line along the Columbia River rather than try to build over the Cascades to fulfill your charter. But the NP management wasn't thrilled with that idea, and he couldn't get a deal. And he was afraid that if they did build west, then nobody would use his ORNN. So he organized a blind pool of East Coast and German investors, and he gained control of the NP. And in 81, he became the NP president. And so at that point, he was financing simultaneous construction of the Oregon and California from Roseburg down to Ashland, and the ORNN through the gorge, and as I'll explain, east into the Blue Mountains, and the NP across Montana. Incredible. Meanwhile, the UP was pushing west using its Oregon Shortline Railroad subsidiary. They were coming west from Pocatello, and they had a goal of reaching Portland as soon as possible. And again, Villard said, well, if they build to Portland, nobody will want my railroad. So he decided he needed to build east to meet the OSL and prevent the UP from becoming a competitor. So construction east from Umatilla on the Columbia, you could bring supplies by steamboat up the Columbia. Following the Umatilla River began in February 81. They reached Pendleton in September 82. Villard negotiated hard with the UP management, and he got a good deal that the meeting point would be at Huntington, Oregon, close to the Oregon-Idaho border. But the construction of the ORN through the Columbia Gorge west of the Dalles was difficult, it was expensive, and it was poorly engineered. Unlike the Durant brothers building the UP or the Big Four building the Central Pacific or Jim Hill, they had very good engineering talent working for them, and Villard didn't have anywhere near that good engineering. So their lines were not built as well as the others. And the first train from Wallula to Portland finally arrived in November 82. Construction of the NP through Montana and the ONC down through the Siskiyous was also very difficult and expensive. This guy is trying to do the impossible, build all these railroads at once. On September 83, a gold spike was driven in Montana, and the NP was complete from Duluth to appropriately named Villard Junction, just near Wallula, and from Portland to Tacoma. The NP had built down from Tacoma to Kalama, and Villard built up the Oregon side from Portland almost to Gobel, and then had a train ferry to go across to Kalama. And then by means of using the OR&N between Wallula and Portland, the NP had fulfilled its charter of a railroad from the Great Lakes to the Puget Sound and became the first Northern Tier transcon. And then meanwhile, on the OR&N, they reached Meacham in October 1883, almost at the summit of the Blue Mountains, where construction halted for the winter. And down on the O&C, they got to Grants Pass in December 83. But the construction through difficult terrain of so many lines all at once was just too much. The debt load of Villard's holding company soared, and Wall Street bears drove down the NP's stock price in late 83, and Villard lost control of the NP, the OC, and the OR&N. He suffered a nervous breakdown, and early in 84, he returned to Germany to recuperate. So in the wake of Villard's departure, the Big Four picked up the O&C, and that became the SP's line to Portland. And the new management of the NP decided they didn't want to use the OR&N. They wanted to build their own railroad over the Cascades to Tacoma. And the bondholders of the OR&N, since the NP doesn't want them and they lost everything else, they decided that they need to sell their distressed company and hopefully to either NP or UP. But they have kind of this unfinished piece, and they decided, since NP wants to build the Tacoma, UP is a better prospect. And to improve their bargaining position, they decided they'll fork over the additional money necessary to complete the line to Huntington as quickly as possible. So the first train arrived in La Grande in July 1884. And then with no fanfare, the last spike of the OR&N was driven at Huntington on November 25th, 1884. And through service with the OSL commenced on December 1st. So at this point, the UP ends in Huntington, and they connect with the OR&N to get to Portland. And the bondholders got a huge relief when in April 87, they got an agreement with UP for the OSL to lease the OR&N. So at least they're off the hook now and they got a cash flow. And then in September 89, the UP directed the OSL to purchase Villard's 50% block of OR&N stock for $12 million. Must have been a huge sum in the day. And that at that point, UP now became the owner of the line to Portland. However, this large outlay helped propel the UP into bankruptcy in 1893. So the bankrupt UP defaulted on the OR&N bond and interest payments. And so the OR&N bondholders, again, German and East Coast guys, took the UP to court. And they said, these guys don't pay, so we want the OR&N to be placed in receivership and become independent again. And the court approved this step effective July 3rd, 1894. So once again, the UP has no railroad to Portland, and it's an independent company, and it was renamed the Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company. And now this is kind of an orphan. It's not one of the big systems, and what's going to happen to it? So Jim Hill made the suggestion, well, we shouldn't have overbuilding in the Pacific Northwest. So how about if the OR&N is jointly controlled by NP, GN, and UP? But then we have another guy stepping into the picture, this guy, E.H. Herman, who's had bought control of the UP, and it was a bargain basement prices after the bankruptcy. And he would have none of Hill's proposal. He noted that NP and GN had their own lines to the Pacific coast, and UP ought to have their own line too. So early in 1900, UP made an offer to the OR&N shareholders to exchange their preferred or common stock for corresponding stock in UP. And practically all the stock in the company was exchanged by the end of the year, and now UP was in control for good. So Harriman invested heavily in the ORR&N, rebuilding the poorly engineered portions and making other upgrades. He died in 1909, but his lieutenants continued to carry out his plans. In 1910, they reorganized all their Oregon and Washington Railroad properties as the Oregon-Washington Railroad and Navigation Company, a fully owned subsidiary of the Oregon Short Line, in turn a subsidiary of UP. And although they had been reduced to paper entities decades earlier, OWR&N and OSL were not formally merged into UP until 1987. And I'll mention that, you know, this origins as an independent railroad separate from the UP slowly disappear over the years, but the mileposts still start 0.0 at Portland and 389.3 at Huntington, where there's an equation with 538 something on the Oregon Short Line. So it's one of the few places on the UP system where the mileposts go west to east. Okay, so let's go to the blues. That was, of course, a barrier for the Oregon Trail wagon trains, and then it was a barrier for building a railroad from to get to Western Oregon from Idaho. The UP and the OR&N had done competing surveys through the mountains, both roughly following the Oregon Trail. The OR&N surveyors followed the water courses wherever possible. So the route is largely one through river or creek valleys and canyons. There were only 4 short tunnels required, 2 of which were subsequently daylighted. But the grades are pretty steep. So I put together a profile, an elevation profile here. You have the mileposts on the bottom, Hinkle at 183 and Huntington at 389, and then you have the elevation. And you can see we've got 3 mountain summits to get over. So we follow the Umatilla River from Hinkle through Pendleton to Gibbon. We turn away from the river and follow Meacham Creek up to the summit at Camila. And then we go down Mechanic and Pelican Canyons to Hillgard. Remember, Hillgard was the given surname of Henry Villard. And then we pick up the Grand Ronde River into the Grand and through the Grand Ronde Valley to Union Junction, where we climb out of the valley up Piles Canyon to Telecasset. Then we go down to North Powder and pick up the Powder River Valley over to Baker. And we climb out of that valley up to Encina Summit, and then go down steep grade, the railroaders called Hindman Hill. And then when we get down to Durkee, we pick up the Burnt River and follow that down to Huntington. And I'll take away the river names and put in the siding names. This is a pretty busy thing, so I won't try to go through all of this. But just to summarize, the tough grades facing the eastbound trains, which were the tonnage trains back in the day. It's pretty easy going along the Umatilla River. At Pendleton, it starts to be 1%, but you don't exceed 1% until you get along Meacham Creek at Bonifer. And then it's 9 miles of 1.2 to Duncan. Then it stiffens to 1.37 to 1.5 for the next 9 miles to Huron. Then you have 13.3 miles of 2%, except for it eases a bit going through Meacham Meadows. And it's downhill and relatively level to Union Junction. Then we have 9.3 miles of 1.5% to Telecasset. Then it's down again and across the Powder Valley. And then we start climbing at Baker, but it's not really a grade until Quartz. And then it's 4.5 miles of 1.5% up to Encina and then downhill. Coming westbound, it's not too bad coming out of Huntington along the Burnt River up to Durkee. But then when you start out of Pritchard Creek, you have 11.6 miles of 2.2%. Pleasant Valley, then it eases to 1.4 to the summit and Encina. Then you don't have anything more than 1% all the way to Hillgard. And then you have another 11.4 miles of 2.21 to the summit at Camila. And at 2.21, that was the steepest mainline grade on the traditional UP system. Harriman era improvements. ABS was in first thing to go in. That was installed Huntington to Pendleton in 1906 with the classic Harriman semaphores, and then the rest of the way Umatilla the next year. And then in 1916, the 22-mile Coyote cutoff was completed from Messner, that's almost a Boardman west of Umatilla, to the new station of Hinkle, and that shortened the line by 9 miles, as well as easing the grades and curvature. And that prompted relocation of the crew terminal and yard from Umatilla to Reeth, which is 4 miles west of Pendleton. The railroad between Hinkle and Pendleton was originally built in the floodplain of the Umatilla River, so it was subject to flooding every year. And so Harriman said, you got to move this railroad up on the hillside out of the floodplain. So that was done in stages. Echo to Nolan was the worst part, so that was done first in 1902. Then Nolan to Pendleton in 1911, and then Hinkle to Echo in 1914. And then up in the mountain, where you had trains stopped to set retainers and cutting out helpers and a lot of congestion, they put in some improvements just before USRA took over during World War I. They finished it where Ross to Camila, and on the other little ways down the other side of Nordine had a second main track and a big center siding at Camila, so trains could stand clear of the mains while they were turning up retainers. Then things were kind of static through the 20s and 30s until the World War II era, when the traffic was really increasing. In 1951, you have the construction of McNary Dam on the Columbia River. So the 6th subdivision coming down from Spokane was going to go underwater from Wallula to Umatilla. So that portion of the line was relocated, and it now had a new junction joining the main line at Hinkle. And so Hinkle UP piggybacked on that project and constructed Hinkle Yard. And so remember, we went from Umatilla to Reeth. Now we go from Reeth back to Hinkle as the crew terminal and classification yard, and Reeth Yard was abandoned. Then with the heavy traffic during World War II, the railroad invested in CTC. First stretch was LeGrand to Pendleton, completed in 1944. Then after the war in 47, they opened LeGrand to Huntington. And the last stretch, Pendleton to Hinkle, was opened in 1952. Initially, the CTC dispatchers were in LeGrand, and then in the mid-1960s, they were moved to Albina Yard in Portland. And that's where I caught up with it when I started working for UP. And here we have the Wabco CTC machines that control the mountain. The first subdivision is on the bottom here, and the second subdivision is right on top of it. And so one dispatcher could dispatch both subdivisions if it wasn't too busy. We have the stretch from Huntington to Quartz here, and we have the stretch from Bonifer to Motanic here. Jim Gannett was the mountain dispatcher on Labor Day 1972. He's got an empty railroad down here on the first subdivision, boy, but you look at the lights lit up here on the second, and he's got a dozen trains there crammed in between Bonifer and Motanic. In the steam era, motive power was Challengers and Bull Moose 2880s on the freight trains, Challengers, Northerns, and Mountains on the passenger trains. Helpers were utilized on the grades to all 3 of the summits. Mainline steam ended in December 55. And in the early diesel era, they still continued with helpers. Eastbound, it was most common to entrain them at Gibbon. They continue through LeGrand, changing crews on both the head end and the helpers, and stay with the train all the way to Encina. And sometimes help break them down the hill further east on heavy trains. Westbound, it would be typical to end train at Durkee or maybe further east down the Burnt River Canyon, and then stay in the train through LeGrand, change crews on the helper and the head end, and at least go to Camila and sometimes further west. The UP was traditional UP was essentially 3 separate railroads: the Northwestern District, the Eastern District and the South Central District all had their own general managers. They made their own rules. In the case of the Northwestern District, we had a separate rule book from the rest of the railroad. And the Northwestern District was very conservative about handling trains on mountains. We had a 40-mile-an-hour maximum speed for any train exceeding 75 tons a car. And retainers and the heavy holding position were required on every car, 20-mile-per-hour max if you're going down a grade of 2% or more. And if your trains were 100 tons per car or more, then you also needed to set retainers on 1.5% grades. And other parts of the UP have had bad runaways and so forth, but the Oregon Division has never had a disaster like that, and I think it reflects their conservative safety rules. At any rate, the mileage claims from the helper crews, changing crews, and 100-mile shove westbound or 130-mile shove eastbound, and then the reverse light engine moves were really expensive. In 1970, Mark Sweet became the train master at LeGrand, and he looked at the bills from this and thought about it and made some calculations, and he said, you know, even running smaller trains all the way to North Platte, I think we'd be better off if we got rid of these manned helpers. So he wrote up a proposal to limit the eastbound trains to 4,500 tons and the westbound 4,000 tons and submitted it. Bill Fox was the VPO. He came out, flew out to Pendleton. Mark picked him up and they drove him around the mountain and they watched it going on. And he said, Mark, you're right. And they approved the management. And so in 1970, manned helpers were eliminated in the Blue Mountains. The UP had invested in local troll on about 16 master and slaves each, SD-45s plus a pair of DD-35s. They tried it first on the overland route, Ogden to North Platte, and it didn't work very well. So they banished it to the Oregon Division and the Northwestern District. It was implemented over the Blues beginning in 1971, but they had trouble with it there. It was just, in those early crude electronics and that stuff, was very hard to maintain radio continuity. And when you lost continuity, the slaves would keep doing whatever they were doing, whether you wanted them to do it or not. And so there were lots of problems with knuckles and drawbars. And so they limited the application to only one train in each direction per day during the 70s and 80s. In 1973, the crew terminal at Huntington was abolished and a new 182-mile crew district, LeGrand and Napa, over 2 mountain summits was established with mountain time prevailing throughout. And then, prompted by the rising diesel prices in the wake of the Arab oil embargoes, manned helpers were reinstated in 1976. And also, I think, you know, local troll had not lived up to its billing. It was not really successful. You know, and it's kind of, you know, the electronics improved so much. Now we take DPU for granted. As, you know, it's really the same technology as local troll, right from the Harris Corporation patents. It's just been rebranded so, and it wouldn't have the bad reputation following it. Okay, so let's talk about the improvements that have been made to the railroad through the 70s and beyond. Things were relatively stable from the 50s, 60s, 70s, but in the late 70s, as Milwaukee started to falter in the Pacific Northwest, the traffic started to really grow in the UP. People tend to think of, oh, it was the BN that brought the Milwaukee down, but actually, if you look at what happened, most of the traffic Milwaukee lost went to the UP, not to the BN. And so the UP needed more capacity over the Blue Mountains. It was basically a CTC railroad with 5,000-foot sidings. With manned helpers coming back, they wanted to run bigger trains. And they also, you know, needed more capacity. So the first step in this 1977 was 7 miles of second main track from West LeGrand to Lone Tree. Trains would stack up, changing crews at LeGrand. So this gave them a place to stand without blocking traffic going the other way. And then that same year, 10 sidings were lengthened from on the order of 5,000 feet to 8,200 feet or longer. So now you could run, bigger trains. Then in 1978, they finished up 3 more sidings they didn't have time to do in 77. And then in 79, still spending money. I forgot one more thing, is in 78, the Hinkle Hump opens. That was not really driven by the Milwaukee road traffic as much as it was just to try to eliminate switch engine shifts on the coast. And then you also have a couple of projects to take out slow curves. The Minthorn 25-mile-an-hour curves were, with a lot of earth moving, were replaced by 60-mile-an-hour curves. And there were some 35-mile-an-hour curves coming out of Baker towards Course that they re-engineered to be 50-mile-an-hour curves, so the eastbounds could get a run at that 1.5% grade. And then in 1979, the second main track was extended from Ross down to absorb Meacham siding. So we have a little more capacity on the tough 2% grade. Then you have the recession coming in, but there was congestion associated with Hinkle Yard, so they built some second main track going west and then east in our territory over to Stanfield. So it's a little easier to get trains in and out without blocking other trains. And then you have the 81, 82 recession and 83, so no spending. But by the late 80s, money is going back into the railroad. And you start extending the second main track out of La Grande the other way up to Perry. And then another siding gets lengthened at Union Junction. And then in the 90s, you have a second main track going in between Pleasant Valley and Encina. And then between Talakasset and Sago. And then in 93, the second main track gets extended down through Drawbar Alley from Meacham to High Bridge. And then finally, Court siding gets lengthened the same year. And then the last, well, not quite last, it wasn't practical to extend Gibbon or Homley, so they built a new 8,200-foot siding in between they named Milam. And then the last big improvement was around the Leonard Horseshoe above Pritchard Creek and up the 2-2 to Oxman, putting in a second main track. And things have been relatively stable since that time, although I think with PSR coming in and the desire to run even bigger trains, we may see some more money going into the Blue Mountains. But basically from 1977 to 94, the railroad had been transformed from CTC 5,000-foot sidings to CTC at least 8,200-foot sidings and a lot of second main track on the steep grades. Okay, but my photos tour of the line is going to be back in the 1970s when it was more short and fast. And so let me give you the lineup from those days. Eastbound, the hot trains, SPX was the traditional symbol for priority manifest out of Seattle and Portland. X is in UP lingo was an eastbound manifest train. The perishable schedules were protected by the Hinkle fruit train. And then until 73, there was another section that originated in Portland called the HFD, the Hinkle Fruit Dow section. They re-symboled it as the Advance SPX in 1973. These were trains to North Platte hump. Then there were trains to the Pocatello hump, the PLA trains. And by the mid-70s, the traffic had grown well enough that there were 3 sections on most days. One originating in Seattle is number 692, one at Portland, and then one at Hinkle. And for whatever reason, both the Seattle and Portland trains would have the same symbol, PLA, but the Hinkle train would be PLAH. And then beginning in 76, as Milwaukee lost the TOFC and auto business, the ART symbol was added for another hot train out of Seattle. Then for the manifest, the tonnage trains going eastbound, the WXH was WX was a traditional symbol on the Northwestern District for a Washington manifest, and WXH was the section that originated in Hinkle, and that was a big tonnage train, usually local troll. He would have the lead and zinc from Wallace or from Kellogg, and he'd have all the lumber from the SI and Spokane. And after they opened the Hinkle hump, they changed the symbol to the Hinkle lumber. NPX was the manifest out of Portland until 78. HPCX, Hinkle Pocatello manifest was the Pocatello hump train. The Chipwreck Special East was distributed the empty chipwrecks and other local traffic. And Special Grain Train East, as grain built up, you had a solid train of empty grain cars. Westbound, there were quite a fleet of hot, light tonnage forwarder trains. The NWF, Northwest Forwarder, was the traditional symbol until 78. In 72, they experimented by adding a second section they called the Northwest Overtake Forwarder. The Triple S, the South Seattle Special, had the merchandise from the transloaders in Clearfield, Utah, including a lot of General Electric appliances. On the off delivery day, it was the LAS symbol. Then you had the Advanced Northwest Forwarder that was re-symboled as the Overland Mail North when they got the mail contract away from the Milwaukee in 76. The North Coast van started in 74, and that was split in 75 into separate Seattle and Portland trains. And then you have the Portland Super Van. And then as UP picked up the auto business, you have the Portland Seattle Autos, the PSA. So a lot of short and fast trains with a lot of horsepower. Nowadays, the manager would say this is just way too expensive. You can't do this kind of thing. But in those days, service was paramount, not cost. On the westbound manifest, NWM was the traditional manifest. You'd have what few loads were not on the forwarder trains, and it was mostly all the lumber and paper empties. The Pocatello Advanced Northwest Manifest was the same kind of traffic off the Pocatello hump. For trains that stayed within the Northwestern District, the Northwestern District got to make up the symbols. It wasn't dictated by Omaha. So they changed the symbol a lot of times. It became the CA, HMS, CA were the telegraph calls for Pocatello, and then it became the POMX. NPH was the carload train once the Hinkle hump opened. CRSW was the Chipwreck Special West that I set up to the unit trains of wood chips. And after the Hinkle hump opened, they re-symboled it as QH. Q was the telegraph call for Napa. And starting in 78, they had enough traffic to run a grain train, SGTW. Then in addition to the road trains, in this district, you have the Hinkle yard engines. To go to Umatilla on the old main line, they would just grab a unit off the power track and call a road crew to go out there. At Pendleton, there was a day switcher 6 days a week to service the Harris Pine Mill and the flour mill there. And then during the night, another crew would make a turn out to Pilot Rock to switch the Louisiana Pacific Mill. Then at LeGrand, it was a yard engine job. He would make a side trip out to the Boise Cascade Mill out the Joseph Branch at Baum when needed. And then going out the Joseph Branch, you had the huge Boise Cascade Mill at Elgin got a turn serving it 6 days a week. And there was a tri-weekly job that went all the way out to Joseph to get the lumber chips and grain from further out the branch. And the little short line, the Union Railroad of Oregon from Union to Union Junction would bring in a couple cars of lumber and a carload of wood chips 5 days a week. And the way they handled the local traffic varied over the years. But for the period I'm going to talk about, they had a tri-weekly local from LeGrand to Baker, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and back Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday to get the lumber from Ellington Lumber and Baker, and the wood chips from there, and the cement from the Wing cement plant. And then there was one more local at Huntington, which would run up to Berkeley and get the rock from Nelson. Okay, so enough of all the text and history. Now let me take you on a photo tour of the main line. We'll go east to west from Hinkle to Huntington. So here we have a steam special pulling by the Hinkle Depot, and it's attracted quite a crowd of managers and workers and the local public. Over on the right there, you see all these Santa Fe and BN cars. This is a detouring BN train. There was something wrong on their side of the river. And then we brought up the Hermiston Fire Department here to put water on the locomotive. 78 was the year the Hinkle hump opened, and initially the hump engines were SD-24s, especially geared and with creep control. Probably the last assignment for those locomotives. This is old Hinkle now, 1972, and here we have the hottest train on the railroad, the SPX, with 2 Centennials and a DD-35. He's made a mainline crew change and is charging out of town. You see the cab track and yard engines on the east end of the yard. And you look back at their hottest train, and it's mostly carload. That little string of about 20 trailers, that's all that, all the eastbound intermodal off from Portland and Seattle that day. The intermodal revolution was very late to come to the Pacific Northwest. And you know, the business stayed in boxcars much longer than the rest of the country. Okay, so we'll go along the Umatilla River going east. This is approaching Hinkle. There's the Stanfield. There's the beet dump down here. And we have the Northwest Forwarder in the morning coming up with the typical 2 Centennials and a 3rd unit they added at Pocatello to get over the Blue Mountains. And there's one cut of intermodal here for Portland and another cut back there for Seattle and the rest of its carload. Now we're along the Umatilla. The original railroad was down here in the floodplain and got flooded out all the time. So Harriman had them put it up here on the shelf out of harm's way. And so here we are coming up to the Barnhart Tunnel. There's our cut of Portland intermodal, and there's the cut of Seattle intermodal, and lumber and paper and perishable interspersed. 4 SD-40s on the train this day. The mountain crews much preferred SD-40s to the big Centennials and other units. You know, on the 2-2 grades, it was really nice to have all those traction motors and rather than hot rods. This is the other side of the Barnhart Tunnel, and westbound the Triple S. And this beautiful boxcar block here, this is all the Clearfield merchandise. A lot of GE appliances. The other appliance makers like Whirlpool and so forth. The UP basically had a lock on all of the appliance business of the West Coast with their transit rates and the transloading facilities in Utah. There was no inventory tax in Utah, so the appliance makers could store their inventory there and just replenish the stores, the retailers from Utah rather than from all the way back in Kentucky or Pennsylvania or wherever. And again, you can see how the railroad is way up on an embankment out of the floodplain. Here they cross from one side to the other, and where they did that, they made sure the railroad was up high so it wouldn't get flooded out. Now we have a meet at Reeth. Here's the Seattle section of the NCV hot train with 3 Centennials. Again, not that much intermodal here. There's a lot of autos there going to Kent and Tigard. And where these farm buildings here, this was once the Reeth Yard, which was abandoned in 1951 when they moved to Hinkle. Going down the siding here is an HPCX, and you can just see the exhaust from the local troll units there, and he's going out the siding at the other end. The NCVS was waiting on the main for him to head in. So I imagine the chief got an earful about that. Now we're at the Minthorn curves in 1975. This local troll, Hinkle Pocatello, is slowed down to 25 miles an hour for these sharp curves along the bank. It's nice the railroad was up on the bank. It kept him out of the floodplain, but then it became slow track here. So then we jumped to 1979, and the track used to go off over here in the bank on the slow curves. And now with a massive amount of earth moving, we have a high track above the floodplain, and the steam train can go chugging through at 60 miles an hour. Okay, so we'll go up out of the Umatilla River and up Meacham Canyon. As you get up to where the canyon gets narrow and it gets steep, and there's a lot of very sharp curves, was affectionately known on the railroad as Drawbar Alley for obvious reasons. So here we have the SPX, that same train you saw at Hinkle with the 2 Centennials, and the DD35 grinding up the 2% grade. And now we'll look down on the same place from up above. We were looking at the train coming through these curves. Now I'm on the other side of the canyon at the top, and we're looking down on an empty soda ash train coming up the 2% grade. And then a little later in the day, we have the Seattle Z. And now with no more boxcars, it's a solid intermodal train. Here's some of the sharp curves in Drawbar Alley as the Chipwreck Special East comes up with the local troll power going back. You don't need local troll on the train of empties, so the local troll units are just on the front here. They're not operating as local troll. And then you can see in Pendleton, he's picked up the Harris Pine and the Louisiana Pacific lumber loads. And behind that are all the empty chipwrecks. And even though this is an eastbound train, at the end of the day, the tracks turn around so much in Meacham Canyon that you're heading right into the sunset. And now we'll go up past Meacham onto the 2 main track. This is near Ross. It's just behind me was the end of 2 main tracks back in 1974. And here's a Pocatello Hinkle drag coming down the 2% with a couple of DD35s and an SD40. And then here we have the SPX. The hot train is being routed into the center siding at Camila. This is at the west switch of Camila. And the reason he was routed into the siding is here comes the Pioneer, westbound Pioneer on Amtrak Pioneer. The Summit is right here where you transition from 221 going this way to 2% down the other way.
They got an 8,000 series kicker in there too.
Yeah, this was in, after 76, it's the Big Mac era where the standard lash-up was 2 Centennials and an 8,000. Now this is the center siding at Camila, where this is the steam train coming eastbound approaching the Summit. These are some of the section homes. In the winter, it's not so easy to get in and out of there, so the UP provided homes. You can see the section foreman has got his whole family out there to watch the steam train go by, and a couple of his men are over on the other side to roll the train. And then the train's working hard. He's still going up to 2%, but he's going to have to transition as he goes around this corner. And then you see him shutting off as he carefully take the train over the Summit. This is not exactly a dynamic brakes train, so you here's a view of eastbound coming there. You can just see the headlight as he's coming up to the top of the 2%, and you got to transition into the 221. So here he is grinding up to the top of the grade and over the top. When a typical dog's breakfast on the Chipwreck Special East, and one of the local troll units, a DD35, an SD40, a Jeep 20, a Jeep 9. And then coming the other way up the 221, here's a drag that had got a drawbar. The first half of his train he left here. Now, obviously, they better have set a lot of handbrakes on that grade, and he's bringing the second half of his train up the center siding, and then he'll put them together. And that's quite a spectacular show with that, transition from 221 up to 2% down. So here we have the heavy North Platte Hinkle grinding up the grade. This normal position for the center siding power switches was like this to provide derail protection. So you had a couple of switch motors at the end. Here we have the NWM drag coming up into. And then just down a little ways is Nordine, the end of two main tracks. And here we have the SPX waiting to go down. The head brakeman is standing out here, and the NWA, Advanced Northwest Forwarder, coming up. I always got mad at my fellow dispatchers for running the railroad right-handed here, because you come around this 8-degree curve into a number 14 turnout, and the trains would typically go into massive wheel slip. And I always say, why the hell don't we run a left-handed railroad there? But nobody listened to me. At any rate, you notice the middle DD35, there's no exhaust coming out, but there's enough power with the other two to make the hill.
They finally listened to you in later years. Where
Good.
most westbounds
Glad to hear it.
stay on Main 2.
That was just like my experience in the headquarters. You know, after they forget who suggested it, they will implement it. At any rate, you don't get a lot of snow in the Blues, but you do get enough to run a snow service of sorts, to where you push a Jordan spreader and have a snow blower. So here they're working away in February '74 to get the tracks clear so the Triple S can come through unimpeded. And here's the steam train at the same place. Okay, we'll go down from Nordine, down Motanic Canyon, down the 221 grade. Here's the Northwest Overtake Forwarder coming up the grade, approaching Nordine, 2 Centennials and an SD40. The Overtake Forwarder was the idea to try to, the Iowa lines were all in terrible decline. Their track was getting slow ordered. They were getting later and later coming to the UP and getting too late to make third morning spot on the West Coast out of Chicago. So the UP got the idea, with the late connections, well, we'll run some powered up forwarders to try to catch up and make it, which they called the Overtake Forwarders. But the schedules were already tight, and they really couldn't make any better time than the regular forwarders. So after a year, they gave up. This kind of illustrates what the Blue Mountains were like in the 1960s, as you have 7 Jeep 9s, a mixtures of A and Bs, taking a drag up the grade. Now we're down at Motanic siding, and we have the SPX going downhill. That same train we saw at the Barnhart Tunnel with the 4 SD40s, and he's got the paper loads on the point. And then coming up the siding is the Northwest Overtake Forwarder, and we have a rolling meet on the 221 grade. And there's the big cut of the Portland Intermodal. Here we have some perishable. This is probably cherries out of the Dalles, maybe pears out of Hood River. The cherries were a disaster. They're just too fragile for rail transport. The claims exceeded the revenues, let alone the cost. So they tried, after failure in the cars, they tried them in the trailers. It didn't work, and they finally just had to give up on the traffic. But, you know, not going very fast, but neither train stopped, which is really nice on the mountain. And then that same place in the summer, here's that NWM drag coming up with 3 DD35s, and almost the exact same place in the winter. Here's the Advanced Northwest Forwarder with the same kind of lash up. This is coming down in a light rain at Motanic siding, basically the other way. With the SPX was just empty auto racks and intermodal by the late 70s, no carload. And then here's the ART train. He's picked up the ingots at Longview and some other stuff before you get back to the intermodal and autos. Excuse me. And then in the Motanic Canyon, below Motanic siding, you can see the freeway overpass down there. Here's a manifest coming upgrade with brand new U30Cs. And then further down from the freeway, you transition from Motanic to Pelican Canyon. Down in this stretch, this was that train that got a drawbar. And if you look carefully, you'll see a couple of crewmen on top of that boxcar. That was where they got the drawbar. So the rest of the train is tied down on the grade, and they're taking the first half up to Camila, and then they'll come back to get the second half. And you can see from a dead start on that 221 grade, they're sanding the rails like crazy and throttle and run 8 to get up the grade. This is coming down Pelican Canyon, the Ace Packs with the perishable and intermodal. Some British Columbia lumber in there too. Off the barge in Seattle. And then coming uphill in the canyon, here's the NOF to the 2 Centennials that came out of North Platte. They added an SD40 at Pocatello in deference to the grade. And then here's the steam train coming down at the same place. And then the next day, the steam train coming back up at the same place. Once we get to Hillgard, we pick up the Grand Ronde River. This is coming down to the west switch at Hillgard. So we're just coming off the 221 grade. And this NPX manifest this day had a couple of SP units working off mileage behind the DD35. You see there's a whole bunch of BN cars there. This was during a strike, UTU selective strikes. They took the BN out in August. And so these are loads off the Bend branch that have been diverted to the UP. This is at Hillgard siding down along the freeway, and we have brand new U30Cs bringing the HFD down and the NWF. Initially, they didn't trust them as much as the SD40s, so they ran them in 5-unit lash-ups while they were happy to run 4-unit lash-ups of the SD40s. And then here's the Seattle section of the NCV with 3 Centennials coming up to Hillgard. And here's the chip rack special coming down along the Grand Ronde and the freeway. You can see all the empty chip racks in train, and he's bringing branch line power back to La Grande on a Sunday probably. And then here's the HFD coming down below between Perry and La Grande. This was double track, so they had to do a lot of earth moving to create a big enough shelf for a second track. And then here we are coming into La Grande Yard, the steam train coasting in. For a while in the 70s, the Carmen had these little Subaru rigs. You see them taking the blue flag off. They didn't stand up to the weather in La Grande very well. They didn't last very long. We still have the watering facilities for the passenger trains, and still here in 72. Okay, so we'll go across the Grand Ronde Valley from La Grande over to Union Junction. Nice valley vistas there with the Wallowa Mountains in the distance. Here's the ABB DD35s on the NWM. That SP car is probably a load, but behind that is all lumber and paper empties. Now we're getting over towards Union Junction. This is the Triple S coming west. And back there is Union Junction siding. And then if you look carefully, you'll see a train going up the grade that he met at Union Junction is now climbing up the 1.5% into Piles Canyon. So we'll head up Piles Canyon. And here we have the SPX climbing out of the Grand Ronde Valley with the Big Mac lash up and the all intermodal train, very typical late 70s scene. And there's a horseshoe curve just beyond there. That's the town of Union and the Grand Ronde Valley. And then here we are coming around the curve. This is again during the BN strike. So there's again a lot of BN loads diverted onto the UP.
Hey, Rob, before you go to the next one, what is that? What are those two cars kind of mid-train there?
These are open top lumber loads.
Okay, thank you.
There's a wrapped open top there. Here's another wrapped.
There's also some rare Burlington lettered green box cars right there in the
Yeah.
top middle.
Here's one here and a couple here, one
Yep.
there, one there. Yeah, quite a few in that train.
Yeah,
Yeah, it might be worth pointing out that this was pre-drone. So you were up there on foot to these locations, weren't you?
Yeah, all these pictures were great hikes. Now
Had a-
I'm standing on the mountain on the other side of the canyon and we're looking across. This is coming around that horseshoe. So we were up on this hill in the previous picture. And here's the ace packs working up the grade. You could see there's a barge that came in from Canada there. So he's got a lot of heavy lumber, but there's some perishable and intermodal here.
they had a great wreck there in 1985.
Yeah, I imagine. And then an hour and a half behind, you have the SPX running with 3 Centennials. And then as we look the other way, there's the west switch of Crooks. Come on, cursor there. And we've double caboosed the Denver UPS, which will cut off at Cheyenne for a quick move. And in the siding at Crooks is the NCVS, also running with 3 Centennials. And you look at, here's the intermodal and the carload and then some junk fill. He picked up a little sugar there at the Napa. But, these very short trains with tremendous horsepower, this was the short and fast UP in the 1970s. Now we're coming up to Talakasset to the top of the 1.5 grade. The general manager's business cars behind the Big Mac Power, a few empty auto racks, a couple perishable, and then all the intermodal. And then looking the other way off the overpass, here's the OMN cresting the top of the grade from 1% to 1.5% down with all the UPS and mail loads. And then we'll go down from Talakasset to North Powder. 1% grade and relatively short. You come down from Talakasset and past, there was a short CTC sighting just a little ways down from Talakasset called Sago. And it wasn't useful for freight trains, but when the Portland Rose trains were on time, that was where they normally met. They usually were on time. But then after the passenger trains ended, the UP ripped it out. But then when they started the 2 main track program, now there was a second main track coming back down here from Talakasset. So they essentially back. And then we pick up the Powder River. You can see the Wallowa Mountains in the distance and the tracks come along the river. And then this is where the river turns like this, but the railroad heads into a cut and heads up the grade to Talakasset. And we have 3 Centennials and an SD40 on the, here's the short hot train that came out of North Platte, and then there's a short fill of lumber empties for LeGrand, but that they'll cut off at LeGrand. And then once we're down at North Powder, the grades and curves are behind us, so they can open the throttle for a fast run across the Powder Valley. And so here the ace packs is accelerating. And then coming the other way is the NCVS at crossing the east switch of North Powder. And you see the brake shoe smoke. He's in Big Hole here. He had a dynamiter and it got him on that curve. But they pumped off the air and everything seemed okay and they took off again. Same place with some rain clouds in the mountains. You can see now it's 78, so the helpers are back. So these guys have made the light move from LeGrand and they're going all the way to Durkee or further to pick up a westbound train. Meanwhile, the hot Triple S with all the boxcar merchandise and the high-speed geared units is charging down the main line. We'll see in a moment. I photographed him at Courts, and then I had to just bust-ass drive 75 miles an hour on the freeway and just barely beat him here. Okay, so we'll jump over to Baker and up the hill to Encina. Here we are at Courts, and you can see the break in grade where the 1.5% grade starts leaving court siding up to Encina. In the winter, the blues are full of snow. We have a nice block of perishable out of Hood River ahead of the Portland Intermodal. And then coming down at the east switch of courts is the Portland Super Van. This was the last train of the day out of Chicago. Or left Chicago early afternoon, and then they would try to make third morning dray pickup on the West Coast. So this would be, a short train making an incredible fast run, like 50 hours to the coast. So a Centennial and a Fast 40 on a little train. He's, just coming off the curves and the slow track, and now he can open it up. And so he's really kicking up the dust as this guy is off to the races. Here's the Triple S coming down at the same place in a light rain. A number of the DD45s and the DD35s and the SD45s had high-speed gearing. So they would be reserved for the hot trains like this, so they could make the fast run. Here's the Triple S on a different day with the Centennials and an SD40 in the same place. So he's dropping down the 1.5 grade. The freeway is up there. There's a Monon trailer. I'm not quite sure how that made a move from LA to Portland without violating car service rules, but there it is. And here's the Hinkle fruit coming up at the same place. This is in February, so there's not a lot of perishable. Maybe just some potatoes out of storage, interspersed with other lumber and other stuff, but they're running the service, running the schedule. And then the same train up at Encina Summit. You can see the remnants of the Y for turning the steam engines. He's working some BN power, working off horsepower hours you owed to the UP. Then from Encina and Pleasant, we go down to Pleasant Valley and then down Hindman Hill. Here we are at Pleasant Valley, and the 2.2 grade ends right up there, and then there's a brief leveling, and then we go up the 1.4 to Encina, and this is the Portland Seattle autos. You can see the SD40s, fast 40s are sanding the rails hard to take this huge train up the grade. I know this is Milwaukee dominated the autos to Spokane and Seattle, but as their service declined, the stuff moved over to the UP, the CNW and the UP, and that led to the creation of this train. Now we're looking down on Hindman Hill. Pleasant Valley and the freeway are just behind us. The track comes twisting up the grade. Here we have one of my chip rack specials, and there's the local troll power shoving on the huge train of chip racks grinding up the grade. And then after the Hinkle hump, it's resymboled as the QH. Here it is at the same place, coming up the grade. You see the freeway down below. And then mid-train, he's got 3 SD40 manned helper. And then below Oxman siding, here's the Chicago-Seattle Z coming up the grade. This in 94 would become 2 main tracks all the way down through here. Same place, you can see the old Highway 30 overpass I was standing on for the previous photo, and the Pioneer Limited dropping, or the Pioneer dropping down the grade. And then we'll move down to the area of the horseshoe curve. Here's the SPX coming down with the general manager's business car and the Big Macs. Fortunately, the horseshoe was in the shadow, so I came back on a day that was all sunny to shoot it. And here we have all the intermodal out of Seattle and the Big Mac sandwich rounding the curve. This is all 2 main tracks now. And you can look down and see the power going the other way as stuff from the Port of Tacoma goes by. Probably not. Probably was Port of Seattle in 78. Fesco is a Russian container line. OOCL is Hong Kong. And here's an NWM drag coming the other way up the grade in in the late afternoon, early evening. And we can look down and see the mid-train helpers. And then a shot from the late 80s, 89, and some newer power on the North Platte, Seattle coming around the curve. And by this time, they'd gone to a practice of the helper shove on the rear rather than being cut in. Now we're down, this Portland Supervan is just starting into the horseshoe curve. You can see the start of the 2-2 grade at the bridge over Pritchard Creek there, and Durkee Town is back there. So the power is notched out to get up 2-2 grade. And here's an empty soda ash coming off the 2-2, coming the other way. And then from Durkee, we can go down the Burton River Canyon to finish this off. The tracks are kind of level through Durkee, and then they drop off down into the canyon. So here's the Chipwreck Special East dropping down into the canyon, leaving Durkee. Then here's the SPX further down along the Burnt River next to the freeway. This is Monday morning, and so Sunday night out of Seattle, there wouldn't be anything to haul. And you'd cancel the ASPX. So the Monday morning's train would have typically 4 Centennials and 2 SD40s like you see here, and not much of a train. The caboose is right. All right, so I'll end the show here with the beautiful LeGrand Depot, still extant there and still used by the railroad. And I'll thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'll take a look in the chat to see what questions might be there.
Very nice, Rob. As good as I remembered at the Union Pacific Convention. Just a delightful presentation, folks. I hope everybody had a chance to enjoy that. While I've got everybody here, I'd like to actually put my friend the Firebug on the line, George Foster. And George, could you talk a little bit about taking trains up Drawbar Alley for us?
Yeah, Drawbar Alley was eliminated before I got there in '86. So, but I did talk to people that always referenced it and said how often that they get a drawbar in those tight curves between the High Bridge and Meacham. So at that time they had those tight curves, and I don't remember if they had daylighted those tunnels yet, but in really old photos there were 1 or 2 tunnels between Meacham and the High Bridge. So they'd get a train that was like maybe only 3,600 tons, but pulling through those tight curves, and if the unit slipped, they'd get a drawbar. So it was just what it said. But when I got there, it was much improved. So, you know, we didn't have many problems and everything there.
I didn't mention that when they put the second main track in there, they also did a fair amount of earth moving and eased the curves quite a bit, and that certainly helped. My memory, George, is I'd be riding trains. I rode freights whenever I could just to understand the railroad and what was happening. And you'd have these mixed consists of SD40-2s and SD45s. And the 45s had the high-speed gearing. They had 59-18 gearing, not 62-15. So they would make transition at different times than the other units, right? And when you're going about 20, 22 miles, they were constantly going in and out. And every time they would go into transition, we'd hold our breath for fear we'd get a drawbar.
Yeah, because on the SD40-2, you could consistently, especially if you're on level track, you know, you're kind of really getting going. And so you could consistently depend upon getting through transition at around 22 to 24 miles an hour. And when you went to transition, the ammeter dropped out, and then it came on with a vengeance.
Yeah.
And so anyway, each unit kind of, well, you know, obviously made its own transition. So you might make transition on your unit, but maybe the others hadn't made theirs yet, or vice versa. Yeah. So, but with the SD45s, I had some other issues with those because it never seemed like the governors wanted to govern the engine consistently. Somebody must have thought that filling up the governor with the oil meant filling it to the top when it should have been
No.
halfway in the sight glass, so that you wouldn't have that what we called hunting of the engine. You would just, each throttle notch you'd go up and it was real nice and clear and consistent. Whereas when you had the governor full, then you'd go one notch at a time and it'd go ooh, like that. So you just never knew. But
Wow,
I prefer the dash twos the way they rode also.
great stuff. Anybody in the audience got a question either for George as an engineer who operated in the Blue Mountains or for Dr. Leachman? For fantastic presentation, Rob. I will say as a spoiler alert to those in the audience, Dr. Leachman and I are going to get together again for some future programming, folks. Rob's got a lot of really great material, and I can't wait to be able to share it with our audience. So that's going to be coming up in the not too distant future. We're getting towards the bottom of the hour, so I'm going to say, does anybody have anything more, or anybody want to? Roy Gelder,
I
Janine,
just had
go ahead.
just one question for Dr. Leachman. Did the opening of Hinkle have anything to do with the closure of Pocatello, Dr. Leachman?
No, is that it was a proposal from the operating department to try to reduce locals and switch engine shifts west of the Cascades. And to concentrate, all the detail blocking, even for industry zones at Hinkle. And they, I was in Omaha at the time when we did the cost studies on it and the simulations and stuff. And it was a real battle to try to justify it. And they never talked about any effect on the rest of the railroad, Pocatello or east. They were still going to continue to do that. It was just a proposal to try to, save money on the coast. And, they wanted to take I had put in the chip trains, which bypassed Hinkle and all the other yards to turn the chip cars faster. And they wanted my chip cars back in the Hinkle hump. They needed as many cars over the hump as they could possibly get to justify it. So I was an enemy of that project, but they won out and the Hinkle hump got built. And, it was much, much later. Those humps coexisted for a very long time before Pocatello was shut down. I think, didn't it, even last into the 90s, I believe. And I think it was more a casualty of the merger. Once you had the SP, you didn't need to run LA traffic via Pocatello. And so that took was a huge amount of traffic off that yard. So that was really the death knell.
All right, very interesting.
Thank you.
So before I let everybody go and let you guys get out and do your last minute Christmas shopping, I just kind of want to check around the country and see what our weather conditions are. I'd like to start with my dear friend Dave Johnson in Mason City, Iowa. What's it like there today, Dave?
It's mostly cloudy, about 38 degrees. We're going to have a warm week coming up, no snow on the ground. I do have one question for Dr. Leachman.
Go ahead,
And
Dave.
that would be, when you were in Omaha, did you know or work with Joe Reddy or Paul Phillips?
I didn't work with either one. No, I didn't know them.
Okay,
So-
they have some sort of an organization that special studies and stuff like that. I was there from 67 to 79, and I traveled. I started out in the mechanical department, and ended up a couple of years after the management trainee program working assistant to the general mechanical engineer. So all the units you were showing, all the area you had, I had a pass good on everything, and I was over it a few times in the engine cabs. And this has been a most delightful presentation. It's like returning to home.
So, yeah, Dave, the only guys I knew well in the mechanical department were Vince Macklin, who did the train performance calculator software. I worked with him a lot.
Yeah, I worked with Vince for a while. And he would, the projects you're talking about, he would give to me because he didn't know hardly anything about computers. And
Yeah,
that whole episode eventually got me working for John Jorgensen at MIS, and
Uh-huh.
most of my time was interface MIS to the communications department, because I could the old wire chiefs, the grizzly old wire chiefs. I was one of the few young kids wet behind the ears that could actually send American Morse, and
Yeah.
I got along famously with those old guys.
Yeah, my first job on the UP was breaking in the wire office in Albina, but we didn't use any Morse. It was all teletype. By the way, Dave, is that I have fond memories of visiting you in the Iowa terminal shop, and I was so impressed with what you were doing with that little short line.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't recognize you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Iowa traction, folks. So that's a real railroad. And Dave, I know we're going to digress here a little bit, but I want you, because I've got Roy Gilder on the line. Roy worked for many of his years for the Belt Railway of Chicago. And Dave, just briefly, could you talk a little bit about your system that you developed at UP that could keep track of where every freight car was in the yard?
Yeah, that could be a program in itself.
Let's think about that.
The project I was assigned was it got assigned just because of random discussions. But there was a gentleman that had worked for an engineering firm out in California, and the problem was, how do you identify where every car is in a flat switch yard? The hump yards, of course, had their computers and all that. They knew where everything was. But so he told me the engineering firm that he worked for, they worked on this project for 2 or 3 years and they could not come up with anything. They didn't know how to do it. Well, I couldn't hardly believe that. So I was into HO model railroading, and I went home and I made a HO for the HO track, a little detector that would each detector would produce 2 outputs, either a 0 or a 1, and depending upon when any one output changed, you had to create an interrupt and you had to save that state. And if you start thinking about a wheel moving across these detectors, it would take of 2 white lights, say there's a sequence would tell you whether it's going left to right or right to left. In addition, a little logic could tell whether the wheel moved onto the detector and then back off of it, not completing a complete movement. So I made this up that evening in my house, a little 3-foot track, and I took it into this MIS director that said it couldn't be done, set it on his desk, and he about wet his pants. So anyway, the Union Pacific was paying for they were paying the tuition for a master's program. And so I was in that, and for a thesis, what I did was I wrote my thesis on computerizing a flat switch yard. And not only Honeywell donated a 315 process control computer, and I built about a 16-foot yard with 5 or 6 tracks and switches on each end. And we actually demonstrated this thing. And so I assume you knew Dr. Leachman, you knew Fox, right? The
Yeah.
general. Okay. So during this demonstration, Fox and a bunch of other officials was down there, and I demonstrated this thing, and it had a CRT, and you could list the tracks and so on and so forth. And so when I got all done, the officials were all talking with one another. This Fox was really quite a guy. He kind of sidles over to me and he says, "Well, now this is all well and good," but he says, "I'll bet you the switchman will get this all screwed up real quick." And so I said to him, I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'll be the switchman and you be the yard master, and you tell me what moves you want me to make on this model, and then we'll see if we can screw it up." And he just relished this. He said, "Okay, take that caboose and that car and put it on 5 track, and take these cars from 4 and move them over to 2, and do all this. And so we tore apart a train and we put the train back together again and we got all done. I said, now that's what you want? And he says, yeah. And he says, that certainly has got your computer screwed up. And I said, well, let's list the track and look. And I said, I turned to him and I said, do you want the listing east to west or west to east? And he kind of looked at me and, well, let's go east to west, you know? So I keyed that in and brrr, here's the list. And I said, well, there's the list. What do you think? So he goes right over to the scope and he looks at it and he looks at the model and he looks at the scope and he looks at the model and he does that 4 or 5 times and he says, well, I'll be goddamned. Because it was right.
What year was this, Dave?
Oh gosh, this had to been mid 70s maybe.
Wow. How about that? Eric Vandervoort, Eric's got a question or just a thumbs up? Just a thumbs up. Okay, 2 thumbs up. Yeah, great story, Dave.
I got more story. I had Dr. Leachman, did you ever hear about test car 210 or get on that?
I never got on it, no.
Oh, I can
I knew of it, but I wasn't really close to mechanical department stuff.
Well, they went out when they had all this, the local troll and all that stuff. They went out and hit the test car to these trains and everything. And I never went out on an assignment except once. And that was when they were testing those GE U30s. And I got a call, the guy, Al Williams, was the man that was in charge of the test car, and he had some medical problems. So they gave me a 2-day notice. Be in North Platte on Sunday, and you're going to run to Hinkle, and then you're going to turn they're going to turn the test car, and you're going to run right back with a Hinkle fruit. And I'd never been on that test car before, but I did do for Vince Macklin, I did do an analysis of their stopping brake tests. And one of them was, I got to looking at it, you know, I would get the data and run the computer programs. And I got to looking at it, and here you've got a 6,000-ton train moving 60 miles an hour that got stopped in a 5/8 of a mile. And I said, what? You know, does that sound right? Does anybody think that sounds right?
No.
So,
No.
a guy named Bruner was one of the mechanical officers, a really nice guy. And I felt like I popped in his office and say, I got a question for you. How the hell can this train stop in a 5/8 of a mile with all this tonnage and everything? And he got right on the phone and he called direct to the car, he chewed him out and he says, here's what we found. You guys aren't doing your job. This is impossible. What they found, was one of the transducers on the wheel that produces pulses. It got screwed up, so it wasn't producing all the pulses. And so the train got stopped and the distance was 1.25 miles. However, the pulses only showed about 5/8 of a mile.
So half the pulses were working.
Yeah. I better shut up.
Well, Dave, we'll have you back I'll talk to you after the program.
Yeah.
We'll have you back as a guest sometime. How's that sound?
Yeah, get Dave to do a show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get, Dr. Leachman's got some last minute Christmas shopping to do. So let's just go around the room quick, and I want to check the weather. Roy in Geneva, Illinois, how is it there?
40 and clear.
All right. And Joel McCurry in Cary, North Carolina. Joel, if you're there, give us an update on North Carolina.
We're 50 degrees, clear, and the sun has set. So it's dark out there now.
Oh my. And in Trent in the Rose City, what are weather conditions like there, sir?
49 and sunny for the next few days.
49 and sunny for the next few days. And Gordon Glattenberg, Santa Clarita, California. You're getting some rain, I understand.
Yeah, we have 58 degrees and the rain's kind of tapered off. I did have a question. I was wondering whether that Blue Mountain grade is really steeper than Sema Hill. They're both right around 2.2.
Yeah, 221 and going up Mechanic Canyon in the Blues, 2.20 on Sema Hill. Sema is really dangerous though because of the lack of curves.
Yeah.
That's the big difference.
And you know, they've had 3 terrible runaways on Sema Hill. They've had 0 runaways in the Blues. And that's the difference between the Northwestern District safety and the South Central District safety.
Interesting. Yes, thank you, Dr. Leachman. That's a good point. Just quickly before I let everybody go, Steve, how's in the Tri-Cities? What's it like there?
44 and cloudy.
All right, I'm looking around the room, seeing what else well, I could always check with Michael Sawyer in Tacoma, Washington. What's it like in Tacoma this afternoon, Mad Dog? If you're there. Ah, he must not be. So, folks,
You got about the same weather I got.
oh, okay. Okay, there you are. Yeah, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. So,
I was across the room, sorry.
no worries. You're supposed to be sitting here watching. No, I'm kidding, of course. So
I got chores to do, man.
I understand. I got a few myself, you know, some
Chores.
last minute Christmas shopping and this and that. So I want to thank Dr. Leachman for being here. Rob, a fantastic program. Everybody really loved it. You've got some great stuff that we've talked about. Spoiler alert. I'm looking forward to the first quarter of 24 where we can get together. And I understand you've got some longer presentations that we'll want to do as part of a Cascade Rail Foundation presentation coming up in early 24 as well. So again, thank you. And thank you to Firebug George Foster, engineer on the Union Pacific, operating over that same territory. George, it's always good to have you.
Thank you. Always fun on the grades.
I can imagine. And so at this point, I'm going to say if anybody's got anything more, now is a good time to bring it up. Going
I'd like
once,
to get together with Rob sometime and pick his brain about what kind of cars were used at various times in the 70s and the early 60s, you know, in my modeling, but I'll have to do that over the phone.
So you better come down to Paris in May.
There you go.
Well,
That's right.
might have to do that.
In May.
I don't know, all that warm weather. I'm not used to that.
Thank
All
you,
right.
everybody, for being here today.
Thank you.
And just a fabulous program. And I wish everybody a fantastic holiday weekend. And yes, as Eric just said, I hope everybody has a happy choo-choo underneath their tree. And we'll be
Yes, I
back
do.
again, weather and authorities permitting, in 2024 on January 3rd with Chuck Soul talking about railroading on the Northern Pacific in Thurston County, Washington.
Cool.
So in the
Thanks,
meantime,
Jonathan.
ho, 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 and going once, going twice, I'm going to turn off the recording and say Merry Christmas to one and all. Bye for
And
now,
you.
everybody.